Hiya! If you come from my previous video, part 1 of what causes OCD, welcome back! And if you didn't and just clicked on part 2 without watching part 1, look at you go, you little rebel. I like you.
I also like to live dangerously.
Don't worry, you don't need to have watched part 1 to understand this video. The gist of it is, my name is Anna, I make videos about OCD, and today I'm going to be talking about the psychosocial theories behind what causes OCD. As I've covered before, the birth of a mental illness is this beautiful, wonderful, devastating mystery that involves multiple factors interacting together. It's usually more complex than saying that one thing led to your diagnosis. But there are different theories that explain how and why mental illnesses can occur in some people. And among these, psychosocial theories focus on your lived experience. So they're opposed to biological theories, which focus more on biological traits that you're born with. And psychosocial theories are a big family that includes psychodynamic theories, behavioral theories, cognitive behavioral theories, and sociocultural theories. Without further ado, let's dive in. Let's start with psychodynamic theories. And to do that, we have to talk about the one, the only, Daddy Freud! Sigmund Freud was an Austrian psychoanalyst who basically pioneered psychodynamic theories of mental illness in the late 19th century. And what he claimed was that human behavior is mostly determined by these powerful, unconscious forces, or drives, and also by traumatic experiences that happen in very early childhood. And these drives and early experiences don't actually make their way into our conscious minds because they're deemed too unacceptable or traumatic to deal with them directly. So instead, they get repressed and locked away into our unconscious. But they're still powerful enough to have an impact on our daily life by manifesting, among other things, as symptoms of mental illness. Now, there's been a lot of criticism of Freudian theories, and it's mostly because there hasn't been a lot of evidence to support them. But you gotta give credit where credit is due. You know, Freud was one of the first people to seriously investigate mental illnesses and develop this idea that our mind is not something that we fully control. And as a person with OCD who deals with incredibly graphic, intrusive thoughts and obsessions, I do often feel like my mind is this incredibly dark and mostly hidden thing that I have absolutely no control over. I don't know if I'd necessarily call that the unconscious or drives the way that Freud understood them, but boy does it always find ways to surprise me. Now we'll be moving on to behaviorist theories, and for that we need to talk about yet another daddy of psychology. Drumroll please. Daddy John B. Watson. John Watson was an American psychologist from Johns Hopkins University who basically established behaviorism as a school of thought in the 1910s. He focused on observable behaviors and assumed that all human behavior was learned, and that includes maladaptive behaviors, like, for example, compulsions in OCD. Now, Watson didn't focus specifically on OCD, but he did do a lot of work on phobias, and that greatly influenced the way we think about OCD today. From a behaviorist standpoint, OCD develops much the same way as phobias do, through something called learned avoidance. Let's illustrate with the example of someone who has a phobia of, say, ducks. So this person will see a duck and get really, really scared. But if no duck, no scared. So they'll learn that by avoiding the duck, they can also avoid any negative emotions associated with it, like fear. So in the case of OCD, the duck is replaced with an intrusive thought. And the way we avoid that is by doing a compulsion that's supposed to negate or cancel the power of the thought. Ergo, we learn that by doing the compulsion, we can avoid any negative feelings associated with intrusive thoughts. Unfortunately, that relief is only temporary, and it's exactly how we get stuck in the vicious cycle of OCD. Now, even though Watson made great contributions to psychology, he got some criticism for focusing too much on visible behaviors and not enough on what actually goes on inside the minds of people, aka the cognitive side of things. And for that, we need to go to our third and final psychology daddy of the day, last but not least, Aaron T. Beck. So I've already talked about Aaron Beck in my video about how to treat OCD. He's mainly known as the guy who pioneered and developed cognitive behavioral theories in the 1970s at the University of Pennsylvania. So as their name suggests, these theories are mostly based on behaviorist ideas, thanks to Daddy Watson from before, but with an added new focus on how thinking can affect our behavior. Beck theorized that the way we think about things, the way we interpret what happens to us, has a huge impact on how we'll behave in response to events. And according to him, intrusive thoughts are just kind of random things that'll happen to anybody from time to time. But some of us, the lucky ones, will interpret these thoughts differently from everybody else. Instead of dismissing them as a fluke, we'll interpret them as the sign of a very real, very dangerous potential threat. And because we see them as a real threat, we pay more attention to them, and that's how intrusive thoughts turn into obsessions. Beck also claimed that the way we react and interpret to intrusive thoughts can be influenced by what he called a person's schemas. So schemas are basically internal representations of the world and ourselves. They're a set of unconscious core beliefs that are usually influenced by our past experiences. Now, if I were to guess the schemas of the average person with OCD, it would probably be something like this. The world is not safe. You are not safe. The world is not safe from you, and you are not safe from the world. Be afraid. Finally, we have to mention socio-cultural theories of mental illness. Rest easy, there are no daddies here. We're done with daddies of psychology for now. These theories have to do with how things like your race, your gender, and your socioeconomic status can influence whether or not you develop a mental disorder. And this is a hugely complex and interdisciplinary field, but the gist of it is this. People who come from communities that are marginalized, are discriminated against, experience an added layer of stress in their life that makes them more vulnerable to develop a mental illness. For instance, we live in a patriarchal society, so it kind of makes sense that more women tend to develop mental disorders compared to men, and that's especially true for anxiety disorders. We also see higher rates of mental illness in people who have a lower socioeconomic status, and the same can be said for people who come from ethnic minority groups, who also have to deal with the added pressure of racial stereotypes and prejudice. Now, when I was making this video, I didn't find a lot of research on the topic of race in OCD, but I did find an interesting study from 2020 that was published in the Journal of Clinical and Experimental Psychology. This study looked at a bunch of Caucasian, Hispanic, Black, and Asian people, and it found that even though there were no differences in the prevalence of OCD across races, Caucasian people were way more likely to actually be receiving treatment for OCD. Now, this could be due to a lot of things, from a lack of access to resources to cultural differences and stigmatizing mental illness. But as an Asian woman with OCD, I felt like I had to mention it. With mental illness, as with many other things in life, we are not equal, and factors like these, unfortunately, can and do make a difference. So, the answer to what caused your OCD, long story short, is I don't know. And I might just be a random person on the internet, but this is a case where a professional is likely to give you the same answer. The truth is, there are a lot of factors that make you more or less likely to develop OCD, and there is not going to be one answer to this question. And I know this can be frustrating, especially if you just got your diagnosis and you're feeling anxious and angry and confused about this, because it can be really relieving to have one thing to blame. But unfortunately, you're probably not going to get that. Now, the good news is that you don't need to know what caused your OCD in order to be able to treat it. If you want to learn more about treatment methods for OCD, you can check out my last video here. And if you have any questions about anything I mentioned in this video, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them. Take care of yourselves, everyone.